So now that we have our plaster molds made, we want to really learn how to slip cast. The slip casting is just taking clay and turning it into like water clay by deflocculating it, which is a chemical process that neutralizes the clay particles through acid, so they don't like congeal together. They kind of just stay freestanding in the water. And you can make your slip a couple ways. The easiest way I find is if you can get your clay to be in powder in dry form, and that way you just add it to the water and add the mixture of chemicals in it to deflocculate it. Another way, which is probably more accessible, is these 25-pound blocks by Aardvark. I like to, use a recipe that I found online that requires 100 pounds of clay and 5 gallons of water. But since these are a lot more accessible, you can cut that recipe into a quarter and do 25 pounds of clay for 1.5 gallons of water, or 6 quarts, which I had already measured out and put in here. And I like to make my clay, if it's in this block form, into little pieces, so that way when I add it into the water, it gets diminished a lot easier, or breaks down quicker. And I'm just using a nylon tool, wire tool, to make these little chunks. And I've already measured out my water, so I'm going to just dump all these little clay bits into the water. And you can break up these little chunks in the water, allowing more surface area for them to get soaked. Um, Now that all the clay is inside the bucket, I'm going to let it sit for 24 hours, let everything get nice and soaked, and I'm going to hit it with a mixer on a drill, and we'll go from there. Alright, so now that we've had our porcelain clay that we cut into chunks and added into water, we're going to mix it up with a mixer attached to a drill, and then we use the lid with a hole in it as a splash guard, so you don't get slip and clay and water everywhere. You don't make a giant mess. So you have all these little chunks that you want to break down. We're gonna probably sit here for a couple more minutes mixing the mixture. We're getting the clay nice and broken down because you don't want it to settle like this. And I'm checking to see if this webs to show you after what happens when we add deflocculants to it. It doesn't web for too long, but it's a good consistency you want to have at this stage. I still have small chunks here. And you just want to break those down. That's embarrassing. Alright, so now that we've let our slips sit for 24 hours, we're going to mix our deflocculant together. And that'll require, with the recipe that I have found, get this to focus. We're going to need 23 grams of soda ash, 14.6 grams of barium carbonate, and 2.5 fluid ounces of sodium silicate. But since we're doing a 25-pound block of clay, we have to multiply it by 0.25, which will give us 5.75 grams of soda ash, 3.5 grams of barium carbonate, and 0.625 fluid ounces, which I have converted into milliliters because I have a syringe and it makes weighing this small amount of liquid easy. So I'll measure out 18.483 milliliters. And we're going to use a triple scale balance beam using grams to measure the weight of our chemicals. We're going to start with the soda ash. And I'm gonna add that into this small amount of water that I boiled, because I put 1.5 gallons of water into the bucket. And I want to start off with very little water. If it's too watery of a slip, it will take forever to soak up and you'll just saturate your mold with water. And you don't want to do that. And maybe 1.5 grams of barium carbonate. And then we're adding the barium carbonate to the water. And this syringe has up to 35 milliliters, and we only need 18.4 milliliters of sodium silicate. And then I just add that to the boiling water as well, or boiled water. And you're just gonna want to mix that up real nice in the cup. Alright, so I've agitated the clay as much as I could to get it nice and liquidy, ready to add the defogant mixture. Just kind of give that another mix. And then we're just gonna give that another good mixing for a few minutes. And this is what I'm checking to see. You see the web in between my fingers? That's about how thick and runny you want your slip to be. If it's too thick, it won't pour into the mold right and it'll dry faster. If it's too thin, it'll saturate the mold and you will be stuck waiting for a while to get anything casted. If your slip's too thick, you can add more water to it, but I would do it in segments, measure it out with a measuring cup, and just go and add, and try to problem solve. If your slip is too watery, I would leave the lid off of your container, maybe set it out in the sun with some mesh over it so that nothing falls into it, or you could just let it out and let it sit in your space to evaporate the water, and then make adjustments according to that. And that's how we make casting slip. So now that your casting slip is all mixed and you like it how you want it to be, I would let it sit for another 24 hours before you go and pour it into a mold. You just want to get you want to let the deflocculant get dispersed throughout the cup or the container, and you want to mix it again every time you go to use it. Mix it just to get the kite consistent and the mixture consistent. Otherwise, you'll just be pouring watery slip from the top instead of like really distributing the sediment that settles at the bottom. So yeah.